The Westland Lysander was created to satisfy Air Ministry specification A3934. Issued in 1934, the new specification called for a new Army cooperation aircraft with short landing and takeoff capabilities to replace the Hawker Audax. It was intended that this new aircraft would undertake artillery spotting, dropping messages, dropping bombs, and reconnaissance, as well as other general support missions. To better understand the role the proposed aircraft was supposed to fill, throughout 1935, Westland Technical Director W.W. Teddy Pettit, Chief Designer Arthur Davenport, and Chief Pilot Harold Penrose spent time talking to the Army Corporation squadrons of the Royal Air Force. This led to the conclusion that the new design needed to have an unobstructed forward view for the pilot, good control and handling at low speeds, and short takeoff and landing capabilities. There is much conflicting information on whether the aircraft was designed by Pettit or Davenport. Aviation author James Mk.II concludes that, quote, "To this day it is unclear who should be given greatest credit for the Lysander," end quote. In June 1935, the design was submitted and Westland was awarded the contract for 2 prototypes. The prototype was given the designation P8 by Westland, and the design was eventually named Lysander by the RAF after the Spartan general. Within a year of receiving the contract, the first of the 2 prototypes were ready. Taxiing trials began on the 10th of June 1936, and 5 days later, on the 15th of June, the Lysander took to the skies for its first flight. The first prototype was powered by an 840 horsepower Bristol Mk.III radial engine. A production order of 144 arrived in September, and the second prototype took to the air on the 11th of December 1936. The second prototype had a 905 horsepower Mk.XII radial installed and was sent to India in 1938 to undertake tropical trials with No. 5 Squadron. There are some points of the Lysander design that are worth mentioning. The undercarriage was fixed and the wheel spats contained each a single .303 Browning machine gun with approximately 500 rounds. A synchronized gear was not needed, as positioning them on the wheel spats meant they fired outside the arc of the propeller. There was also the option for stub wings to be fitted to the wheel spats so that bombs could be carried. The wings of the Lysander were also quite unique, featuring automatic slats and flaps. The slats and flaps were controlled by airspeed, so as the airspeed passed a certain point, the slats would automatically deploy, which in turn would open the flaps. This helped to achieve the great low speed performance of the Lysander. The first squadron to be equipped with the Lysanders were No. 16 Squadron based at Old Sarum in June 1938, replacing the unit's Hawker Audax. The first production models were designated Lysander Mark I's and were powered by 890 horsepower Bristol Mk.XII engines, allowing them to achieve a top speed of 219 miles per hour and a range of 600 miles. Armament consisted of 2 forward-firing .303 machine guns, 1 in each wheel spat, and another 2 were located in the rear cockpit. 4 20-pound or 1 500-pound bomb could be carried on stub wings on each side. 116 Mark I's were produced. By the time war broke out in September 1939, the Lysander was being operated by 7 squadrons, 5 RAF squadrons and 2 auxiliary Air Force squadrons. Additionally, September also marked the introduction of the Mk.II into service. This resulted in many Mark I's being sent to squadrons overseas. The Mk.II had the 905 horsepower Bristol Perseus 12 engine installed, boasting top speed from 219 miles per hour to 230 miles per hour. Bomb loads stayed the same, and armament was either a total of 4 or 3 .303 machine guns. In October 1939, 4 Lysander squadrons, numbers 2, 4, 13 and 26, moved to France. No. 16 Squadron arrived in April 1940. May 10, 1940 signalled the German attack on France, Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg, and as a result, No. 4 Squadron were relocated to Belgium. In the skies over Western Europe, Lysander crews bravely flew reconnaissance, artillery spotting, light bombing and supply drop missions. However, the Lysander was no match for modern German fighters that swarmed over the battlefields in Western Europe. Between the 10th of May and the 23rd of May, No. 4 Squadron lost 6 Lysanders in the air and 5 on the ground. While aerial victories were limited, on the 22nd of May, a Lysander of No. 2 Squadron did account for a Henschel HS-126, and Junkins Ju-87. By the end of June, as Allied troops were forced back to Dunkirk, the Lysander units were withdrawn back to Britain. 174 Lysanders had been sent to France, only 50 returned. 88 had been shot down, 30 destroyed on the ground, and 120 crewmen killed. Back in Britain, the Lysanders continued to operate over France. Again, it did not fare well. In one mission of 16 aircraft, a mixture of Lysanders and Hawker Hectors to drop supplies, only 2 returned. Following the fall of France, the Lysander was quickly withdrawn from frontline squadrons based in Britain, being relegated to secondary roles such as target tugging and air-sea rescue. In August 1940, the Mk.III was introduced, powered by the 870 horsepower Bristol Mk./20 engine, and later variants, the Mk./30 engine, and top speed dropped to 212 miles per hour. The Mk.III was the final combat version, with a major change being the addition of floor and side armour. The Lysander would find a new role as a special operations aircraft, performing clandestine duties with a special operations executive. It is this that is perhaps its most famous role. Here, the Lysander, operating with No. 138 Squadron Special Duties, formed August 1941, and No. 161 Squadron Special Duties, formed February 1942. They undertook missions into occupied Europe to drop agents and extract individuals, e.g. downed airmen, resistant leaders, spies. The short takeoff and landing capabilities of the Lysander made it ideal for this role, often having to land in fields illuminated by the 3 torches of resistant fighters. Although it did occur at least once that the Germans were waiting and opened fire on the Lysander. Operating between August 1941 and the end of 1944, the Lysander took part in approximately 400 SOE sorties. No. 161 Squadron alone was responsible for dropping 293 individuals into France and returning 500 individuals back to Britain. The Lysander Mk.III and Mk.III were utilized in this role and designated Mk.III SD and Mk.III SD, having been painted all black, an extra ladder for the passenger added, and rear armament and external fuel tanks removed. From February 1944 to June 1945, No. 148 Squadron operated the Lysander in very similar clandestine activities in Italy. The Lysander would also serve with the RAF overseas, primarily in Egypt and India Burma. As Mk.IIs entered service in Britain, Mk.Is were sent overseas, with the first squadron equipped being No. 208 Army Cooperation Squadron based in Egypt in April 1939. By the time war arrived in Northern Africa in June 1940, with Italy's entry into the war, No. 208 Squadron had 13 Lysanders Mk.Is on strength and were employed in their originally conceived Army Cooperation role. The squadron also operated Hawker Hurricanes. In Northern Africa, the Lysander was successful as an Army Cooperation aircraft. In April 1941, as Greece came under threat, 3 Hurricanes and 9 Lysanders of No. 208 Squadron were moved to Crete. In the brief campaign that followed, before being evacuated, 3 Lysanders and 3 Hurricanes were lost to the Luftwaffe, although no casualties were sustained. Shortly after being evacuated, the Lysanders and No. 208 Squadron were replaced with Tomahawks. Back in the desert of Northern Africa, No. 6 Squadron also operated the Lysander, being equipped with a type from February 1940. Originally based in Palestine, the squadron were moved to Egypt with the Italian declaration of war. The squadron moved forward with the initial Allied advance. However, in the ensuing retreat back to Tobruk, the squadron were ordered to stay and provide support for the besieged troops. At the start of 1942, the Lysanders and No. 6 Squadron were replaced by Hurricane Mk.IIs. In India, the first squadrons were equipped with the Lysanders in August 1941, these being No. 28 Squadron RAF and No. 1 Squadron Indian Air Force. This was followed by No. 20 Squadron RAF and No. 2 Squadron Indian Air Force. With Japan's entry into the war in December 1941 and their invasion of Burma, No. 28 Squadron were sent into Burma and utilized throughout the retreat. At the end of January, start of February, No. 1 Indian Air Force Squadron were also sent into Burma. Here, both squadrons undertook Army Cooperation and bombing sorties. After seeing heavy action, No. 28 Squadron were withdrawn from the front back to Lahore around March 1942 and replaced the Lysander with Hawker Hurricanes that December. No. 1 Squadron were withdrawn in March and in June began their conversion to Hurricanes. No. 20 Squadron RAF did not enter into combat against the Japanese until July 1942 and flew in support of the Chinese troops on the ground in Burma until October. They continued in the Army Cooperation role until beginning their conversion to Hurricanes in February 1943. In the Indian Air Force, No. 4 Squadron would be the longest operator of the type, utilising it from February 1942 to June 1943. After this, the Lysander served in training units of the Indian Air Force. The Lysander well phased out of frontline service by the middle of 1943 in India, and only a handful relegated to training duties. The Lysander would be once again employed in special duties to undertake clandestine operations over Burma. In January 1945, No. 357 Squadron RAF Special Duties added a flight of 10 Lysander Mk.III SD to their 10 Liberator and 10 Dakotas already on strength. A specially designed long-range fuel tank was added to these Lysanders. Operating in a very similar role to that in France, dropping and picking up agents behind enemy lines, between May 1945 and October 1945, 405 sorties were undertaken. The final 100 Lysanders produced were TT Mk.IIIs. These were target tug aircrafts with the rear gun replaced with a winch and pulley system. It is believed that approximately another 400 Lysander Mk.I, II, and IIIs were converted to target tugs. The Fleet Air Arm took delivery of 67 Lysanders from the RAF starting from December 1940. A total of 4 Fleet Air Arm squadrons flew the type. The Lysander was produced under license by the National Steel Car Corporation in Moulton, Ontario, Canada, for use by the Royal Canadian Air Force. The pattern aircraft, a Mk.II, was delivered in January 1940, and eventually Canada would produce 75 Mk.II and 150 Mk.IIIs. A handful was shipped to RCAF squadrons in Britain, with the vast majority staying in Canada and undertaking target tugging and communication roles. Post-war, a few were utilised as civilian crop dusters, but they were rather a rarity. There were several other foreign uses of the Lysander, including a single one was delivered to the French, 36 Mk.IIs were delivered to the Turkish Air Force in 1939, 6 found their way to the Irish Air Corps in 1939, the Royal Egyptian Air Force operated 20 Lysanders. It is believed that these might have still been utilised in the 1947-49 Palestine War. In January 1940, Finland ordered 17, 9 were shipped semi-assembled, and the remaining 8 planes were to be flown from England to Finland. Only 3 of the 8 left England, with 2 making it to Finland as 1 was damaged. Thus, Finland only took delivery of 12 Lysanders. 8 were shipped to Portugal in September 1943. Finally, the United States Army Air Force, Australia, South African Air Force, and the Free French Forces all operated the Lysander. The Lysander design was also utilised to experiment upon. These experiments included what would become known as the P-12 Delane, which modified the rear fuselage, adding a turret at the end of it and installing a twin-tail tandem wing. This would have been utilised to strafe beaches in case of an invasion. Another Lysander was modified to have a ventral turret installed, again to be utilised to strafe beaches in case of an invasion. Other experiments included mounting cannons, trailing different undercarriages, and being equipped with an air brake. When production of the Lysander ended, 1,670 had been built, including 225 in Canada. It was designed for a role that was outdated for the time period, and that suffered greatly in early combat against the modern air force of Germany. However, it found its niche, operating very successfully as a special duties aircraft, dropping off and picking agents up behind enemy lines. It is in this role that the Lysander is most famous for. Today, a number of Lysanders exist in both static and airworthy condition in Canada, United Kingdom, United States, Belgium, and India.